What's up, gang? Can I call y'all my family? Maybe y'all are my family, I don't know. But today, let's cut right to the chase. I'm going to discuss the law of Moses along with any other like rule book style religions. I'm going to discuss the faults in them, and I'm also going to discuss what the better option is that Jesus provided for us. You want to definitely stay to the end for when I talk about that better option, because if you just watch the first 2 points, that's just going to be a whole dang gripe fest. But at the end, I'm actually going to show you what the better option is. So instead of following a rule book, you're actually following the truth, the thing that Jesus wants us to follow. So really, the law of Moses and any other man-made religions are man-made and man-enforced. Yes, the law of Moses was originally created by God and given by God through Moses to the world. But over time, before Jesus lived, it became shifted and perverted by man, and it started to include things that didn't even matter. Like in Mark 8:13. Let me look that up real quick. This is a verse that I wrote in my script. Yeah, I thought I had a verse, but I didn't. That like talked about how it was shifted and perverted by man. I know there is a verse in the Bible that talks about that. Like over time, it was shifted and perverted by man. And also, the law of Moses became a part of governmental law. It became from a set of commandments that God gave the people. God gave them to those rules to guide them. It became part of the governmental law, the law that the government enforced, and man started enforcing the law that God gave instead of letting God do the job of enforcing the law, because it's not man's job to enforce the law that God has given. It's God's job to do that, you know what I'm saying? So the man-made, man-enforced nature of these rule books are make it super easy to show bias towards some people and forgiving others more easily. This is a verse that I know I actually remember is Acts 18:3-17. I'm not going to read that whole story. In Acts 18:13, it's the Jews were getting mad at Paul for persuading people to worship God. It says, this man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. In the Acts 18:13, it says the Jews are saying, this man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. And then at the end, it talks about the ruler of the synagogue being beaten, and the Jews just not caring about that. The proconsul, I think it's like some sort of Jewish leader, did not care a thing about that. So they cared about their religion, their law being threatened, but they didn't care about their freaking synagogue leader being beaten to death, bro. And so that just shows how bias is super easy to be shown in these man-made, man-enforced rule books, you know what I'm saying? Like the law of Moses, which originally was made by God, but ended up being perverted by man. And also, the law of Moses and other things like this are super easy to be legalistic in, because people will easily care more whether or not it's something is following the law or going against the law, rather than caring about how good something is or caring about how the law is, how the spirit of the law is kept. Let's go back to Acts 18:13. This is a verse that's kind of prominent in this video. They cared more about, we just read this verse. It says, this man persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. That's what the Jews were saying. And they never said here, hey, this man is persuading people to worship God in a way that is wrong. They never said that it was bad. They didn't care how good the teachings of Paul were. All they cared about is that it was contrary to the law. So the law like this, in the law of Moses and other religions that are rule book based, are very easy to be legalistic in, caring more about the law itself than the spirit of the law or how good something actually is. And let me give an example with earthly law. I'm not saying earthly law is bad in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going to give you an example of how breaking the earthly law, I'm not encouraging people to break the law, but breaking the earthly law can actually help you keep the spirit of the earthly law. For example, highways have a minimum speed that you have to be going. But if it's downpouring rain, you don't want to be going that speed because it would put you in danger and other drivers in danger because it would be super friggin' slippery and be splashing water all over the place. So instead of going that minimum speed, it would be better to go slower than that minimum speed. You would be breaking the law at that point, but you'd still be keeping the spirit of the law by keeping us safe, because the spirit of the governmental law is to keep us safe. So breaking that law, in that case, can actually help to uphold the spirit of the law. And so in rulebook-based religions, it's super easy to be legalistic, caring about the law itself more than the spirit of the law or how good or bad something actually is. I actually have a full video about legalism and licentiousness. It was actually the first long-form video I made on this channel, so I'm going to link that in the description, talking a bit more about legalism and licentiousness and why those aren't super great lifestyles. But like I said, this isn't the end of the story. This man-made, man-enforced law that is super easy to be biased and legalistic in isn't the end of the story. Actually, Jesus, God in human form, got rid of the rule book and instead set an example for us. Jesus set an example while keeping the spirit of the law without having the faults of it, like the easy bias or legalism that it includes. I'm going to just do this one on my phone. I don't feel like turning it in my Bible, but it's Matthew 5:17. Sorry about that. 5:17. Yeah, Matthew 5:17 says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Jesus didn't come to get rid of the spirit of the law. Jesus came here to actually, instead of giving us a rule book, instead of correcting the rule book that had been perverted, he's actually setting an example for us. Jesus didn't give us a list of things to do and a list of things not to do, but he actually lived a perfect life and set the example for us to follow. You know what I'm saying? Jesus never said, do this or don't do that, but he actually just said, follow me. Like it says in John 1:43 and a lot of other places in the Gospels where he's calling his disciples. John 1:43, let me look that up right quick just so y'all know what it is. And it says, John 1:43, the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. And whenever he calls Philip to follow him, he doesn't say, follow me by your own might. He doesn't tell us to follow him by our own might, by our own strength, but by letting God actually work in our hearts. We're not supposed to be knuckling down, trying our best. We shouldn't be trying super hard to serve God and follow Jesus' example, because brute forcing it, trusting in our own strength, will never really get us far. Instead, we need to let God actually do all the work in us. Jesus calls us to follow him, not just to follow a rule book, but Jesus calls us to follow him. And instead of saying, follow me, but you gotta do it all on your own, no, Jesus said, follow my example, and I will work in your heart to help you to further follow that example that I've set. So in summary, rule book-based religions, such as the law of Moses, are man-made and man-enforced. And the only real problem with this is that man is imperfect. Man has its own desires. Man is biased sometimes. Just like we've seen how the Pharisees and the Sadducees added so many dang freaking laws to the law of Moses that it wasn't even what God intended for it to be. And rulebook religions like this are extremely legalistic, caring more about whether or not you're following the rules rather than worrying about if you're keeping the spirit of those rules. You know what I'm saying, bro? But Jesus provides a better alternative to this rulebook religion of the law of Moses. Jesus provides a example for us to follow. Jesus didn't give us the Bible as a rule book, but he gave it as an example. He gave it as Jesus didn't write the Bible, but it's like God breathed. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, document Jesus' life on earth. So Jesus never gave us a rule book, but he actually gave us an example to follow. And Jesus said to follow that example, not to follow a rule book. And Jesus didn't say follow this example and do it by your own strength, but actually Jesus wants us to trust in him to work in our hearts, so that as we have a personal relationship with him, he will change our hearts to make our actions flow out of that, instead of us like having to brute force our way, knuckle down, try as hard as possible. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to make these videos way more unscripted and more just bullet points that I'm freestyling over like I have on my phone here. But I hope y'all like this style of video where I'm a bit more authentic, a bit more like better at talking to the camera, instead of like reading word for word off of my phone, looking at it down like this, you know what I'm saying, like you can see in probably past videos. But let me know what you think of this style of video. Let me know if you actually gained something from this video. Just leave a comment real quick, and also pray to God in thankfulness for it. And with that, peace out and God bless.